I'd like to start with a few, say, like ground rules for our presentation. I'd love to see your faces if possible. Please turn on your cameras. I think it's just easier for me to see the reactions. Thank you, Murilo. Thank you. Thank you, Audi. Right, yeah. So what we'll be talking about here today is about different frameworks to managing complex problems, right? And then what design teaches us to work on those projects together. Okay, so let me start sharing my screen here, and I'm going to share this presentation with you guys too as well later. But over here. All right, so let me just move your window here because I'm not seeing you guys. Move you up here. All right, awesome. All right, I can see you folks now. And let me open this. Right, so I'm going to be introducing you guys to these three methodologies: design thinking, VPD, and design sprint. Okay, so just this little ground rules here. I'm going to have a couple of dynamics here in the beginning, especially to introduce us to these themes, and I'd love your cooperation. Okay, if you participate, it's going to make it a lot more fun to play with. Okay, so here's the little agenda that I prepared. I think that I'm going to start talking about the double diamond framework from the design thinking approach. I'm going to introduce you guys to the value proposition design to help figure out what to build. And then I'm going to talk about design sprint and wrap it up with a Q&A. Okay, so initially, I think that this image here is from the value proposition design, and it describes exactly what I want to get out of this meeting here. I want to give you some frameworks for us to go from this left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. A little bit about myself before we jump in. I'm Jean Menezes. I'm Brazilian. I'm a graphic designer. My undergrad is in graphic design, and I have moved into UI UX in 2016 when I started learning more about more of like this role of the designer before going to the screens. Graphic design is very visual design oriented and very appealing to the final phase of the UI UX experience, which is designing the actual interface. But I started learning more about the UX process, and the things that I learned are going to be like displayed here in this presentation as well. One of the things that I'm mostly interested in, and that's more recent, that's from 2018 when I started doing my master's. I wanted to learn more about the design as a strategic approach to problems, right? And then that's when I learned these tools that I'm going to be sharing here with you today. So first, I want to ask this question to you guys here. Do you guys consider yourself, are you creative? Let me see like a raise hand if you're not with your camera, or like a thumbs up or something. What do you say? Are you guys creative? Real okay? Yeah, I see some thumbs up. Right. So you see here that like in this room here, from what I've seen, about 60% of the people have raised their hands about the creativity, right? And that's actually above the population. There's a research from the Stanford Design School that asked this question to adults, and in average, adults say that 50% of them consider themselves creative, right? So we are, I believed that we would be in this spectrum of more people considering themselves creative, because we come from, like we're talking in a hackathon, so there's already this drive, right, for knowledge and for curiosity and solving problems. But I want to go through a little exercise with you guys here that's gonna perhaps shake the other people that are not in this process. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to grab a piece of paper and a Sharpie if you have it, or whatever that you can scribe in with, okay? And I'm gonna flash in. So for those that are entering now, if you can show your screens, it would be really important for this part of the workshop if you can show your screens, because I'm gonna be asking you to find some stuff in your room, sort of like a scavenger hunt, okay? I'm gonna flash a word on your screen, and then you're gonna have 15 seconds to find something related to that word in your room, okay? So let's see here. Go back to my presentation. I'm going to flash a word. I'm going to give you 15 seconds to each of those items. All right. So first, yeah, grab a piece of paper and a pen and get ready. I'm going to start in 5 seconds. I'm going to show a screen and show something, and you guys are going to grab something for me in your room. Okay. So I want something that can be used for cleaning. Have 10 seconds. Right. 5 seconds. All right. Okay, time's up. And next thing, something that you can throw without breaking. 10 seconds. Right. Right. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Another 5 seconds for those that are gathering it. Okay. So now I want you to grab that piece of paper and I want you to draw the objects that you got. You have 15 seconds. Five seconds. Time's up. Time's up. Stop sketching out the ICU. All right. I want to see, like, let's see, Jose, what you drew? Right, right. I see a cloth and that, yeah, right. And a pillow, and then Eddie. Oh, oh, nice. Yeah, showing off your design skills there. Cool. Let me see yours, Vivek. Oh, a pen. Uh-huh. Awesome, awesome. Right. So you see the level of fidelity that you guys represented those objects is above than enough to what you need to know as a design thinker, right? I'm gonna go back to my presentation. Whenever we're talking about, oops, let me share here. Whenever we're talking about drawing, when it comes to design thinking, it's related to your power of communication about a given concept. You don't have to be, not even like a child could be a design thinker, and usually they are really considered design thinkers from the beginning, right? So just wanted to give that little boost of creativity for you guys in terms of like the drawing skills that you need. It's not the design thinking process is not a process about creativity. Okay, I wanted to dissociate that idea. So let's talk a little bit more about the design thinking process in general. The one that I'm going to be emphasizing on this part of the presentation is the Silicon Valley design thinking process. And it really comes down to in the early 2000s with the foundation of the Stanford Design School by the brothers Kelly. And it was later developed with also the Kelly brothers creating IDEO. And then another big player on that aspect of the design thinking is the Rotman Design of School with Roger Martin in Chicago. What those guys did is they summarized years of research in a process that could be mainstreamed. And it was also convenient that a lot of this thinking was going around in the Silicon Valley, but it was captured from all around the world. And it was heavily diffused because of the dot-com boom in the early 2000s. So a lot of the companies that have prospered from that period of time use the methodology with the Silicon Valley, with the design thinking methodology in mind. So here's the breakdown of it from what the Stanford Design School proposes, and it's very similar to the IDEO method as well. So start with empathizing with your user. In this initial process, you're gathering data, you're focusing on not having a judgment on the user, embracing all of the aspects that you're researching with a beginner's eye. So the main skills here are about curiosity, optimism, and respect, right? So with this empathizing phase, you're expanding your knowledge from the user or the situation that you're analyzing. From the empathizing, we define. So we have gathered a lot of data, we have covered a lot of ground, we learn more about what the situation is in the real world right now, and then we define, we synthesize into one problem statement, into one point of view that we can then explore more, right? So it's basically what we saw in that first image, that we go from a complex world of things that we can experiment into one single thing that we want to propel and look with the designer lenses in the definition phase. From the definition, we have ideation, so it's expanding again, looking at the world of possibilities that we can derive from that problem statement that we created, from that point of view that we're analyzing all of these changes that we're looking at. And then we're prototyping. From the ideation, again, prototyping, we're shrinking it down. In the ideation, we explore many possibilities, we explore the world of things that we can do. In the prototyping phase, we shrink that down into one thing that we're going to test. And then we test it, right? Test is paramount for the UX design process, and it helps for you to validate hypotheses. In all of these steps, you're creating hypotheses, right? Whenever you're mapping the world, you're creating hypotheses of how the world is. So we're mapping it in a way that shows us what it is right now. When we're defining it, we're mapping possibilities to work inside that world. We're picking one thing and looking at it with a closed lenses. So it looks a lot with like this, what's called the double diamond framework. You see that in the beginning, it's that's why I was making these movements with my hand almost like involuntarily, because in the beginning you're expanding your possibilities and understanding the world and analyzing the things that are happening there. Then you converge into a definition of the problem that you see, and then you expand into different ideas, and you converge into a prototype solution of what you have looked at, right? So it's always this movement of expanding and contracting in design. That's why it's called the double diamond framework. A problem that I started seeing with design thinking is that it is a little bit agnostic into what it is that we're designing for, right? It opens a world of possibilities. It opens, you basically can do almost everything that you can think of. But then comes the question, what should you do when you could do everything, right? And it's definitely not everything. So let's look at this image here for a second. If I would ask you as a designer, for example, to have a design mindset, what do you think that this person there in the back needs? What would they need to improve their situation right now? Tell me something that would improve his life just by looking at this picture. You can think about something. If you were tasked, if somebody come to you and say, how can I help? How can you help this person to make his work better or his life better? What would you give them?
A car, maybe.
A car? Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, you can think of a car. You can think of perhaps a motor, right? Like that. We know now that we can motorize this. We can make this a more automatic thing. We can give him perhaps better boots, right? We can give him a coat. It seems like it's cold up there. We could use like a coat. We could give him maybe, you know, like whatever thing that makes it better. But you see that whenever we're thinking about how to improve his life, even when I was thinking about it, when I asked you this question, all that we thought of were nouns, right? And in the design thinking process, it's more important to think as the needs of our users as verbs rather than nouns, right? So if we think about, Jose mentioned that we could give him a car, right? What it is behind the idea of the car that would help him? It would help him to be to harvest better, right? You see that we shifted from a thing to a verb. Like we're shifting it from like if we were thinking about, like I thought, like, oh, maybe he's cold, we can give him a coat or a better boot, right? We can think about like, oh, he needs to walk for long distances. So you shift the mentality from a noun into a verb, and that opens up possibilities inside that spectrum, right? So when you're thinking about these needs that are these verbs, this is sort of like a framework for you to think about a problem statement, right? How do we filter that world of things that we can work on into one thing that's going to be that definition phase that we looked at in the double diamond framework? Here's a list of prompts that are helpful in that process, right? We can think about what's the need, who needs it, what are the top causes for this need, and what are the consequences of not meeting this need that we are trying to define. And you see that all of these are a hypothesis, right? We have in a hypothesis that our user needs X. And then we're going to figure out who is this person that needs X? What are the things that are causing it to be needed? And what are the consequences for when that need is not met? Okay, so here's an example that I got from a real world scenario. So here we explore, like, due to the lack of focus on soft skills and leadership training, undergraduate college students are not prepared for corporate world even after getting the degree, which leads to severe employment issues. Let's break this down. We have a cause, right? We have a cause for that need. We have a stakeholder or whoever needs that, which in this case is undergraduate college students. And the effect of that not being met is employment issues for these undergraduate students. You see that there's a correlation between the things that are on the world right now and the effects that they have in a chain of events, right? And this is considered, it would be considered a good problem statement for several reasons. It's very specific to who needs it, right? It's undergraduate college students. It's not students, right? It's not just a person. It's not a teenager. It's not a young adult, right? It's an undergraduate college student. It already puts them on a frame where you can work with solutions that are inside that frame. And the causes and effects are also well described in a way that allows us to think of ways of solving this problem. From a problem statement, you can work inside a POV, a point of view, right? How all of this we're still like in the research phase and defining phase. So whenever we think about a point of view, here's a little template for us. We are also thinking about the user, so we're thinking about that undergraduate student, right? The need that they have is to have a better access to education about employment, and the insights is the big part here. That shifts from problem statement to POV is that we're starting to give insights into what could be helpful for meeting the needs of that user. And a good insight, a good prompt for an insight is you and your design team and your developers and all the stakeholders involved in a project to ask yourselves, why is important for your users to fulfill that given need? Working together, that will give you a share of insights on why that's important. And if you this is a list of what creates a high value point of view whenever you're looking at these insights. An important insight is something that's very valuable that if not met is going to cause for great problems to your user. A tangible point of view is one that you can measure and you can tangibly define how your user is progressing. That's a tangible point of view. And unsatisfied is when you analyze the world and the world needs, and you realize that there are things that are not met for this user that you're planning for. And lucrative is not only monetarily speaking. You could have, for example, a lot of nonprofits work with giving a lot of lucrative insights to your users, right? So you can think about it in a way that that is defined how to create value for that user. And here is I really like this example here because for you guys that are familiar with the Maslow pyramid of needs, this is very insightful. And it's related to user needs, the things that you can give to them in order for them to escalate this pyramids of possibilities that they will have interacting with the changes that you give to them in the world, right? So you have the base of it here. You see that's functional. At minimum, a product needs to be functional. And we know of a lot of products in the world today that are just functional. They just serve one purpose of doing X, right? But whenever you have that X done in a way that contemplates what your user is trying to do, you can escalate that to an emotional level, right? So in the functional, we're thinking about more of they need to reduce risk for something, they need to connect with people, they need to do other stuff. Whenever you go to an emotional level, you're thinking about their wellness, you're thinking about reducing their anxiety, you're thinking about what's the therapeutic value of this product, what's the fun that you can have. And each product will target one specific thing that's going to be connected. But you can escalate that once you have the initial layer fulfilled. If you guys realized, so far, I have not even talked about solutions, right? There's no solution involved in this process. We're just thinking deeply about the problems and trying to coordinate our thinking into something that's very actionable. That's all that we did so far. If we look back at the double diamond framework, you see that we are in the middle right now. We got to a definition. Whenever we got to a good POV, whenever we got to a problem statement that makes sense to the group to work together, we got to that definition that's going to open for us to discuss possibilities. You see that that's a little bit of an inversion on the traditional way of contemplating new ideas. You would think initially, you know, like you put a bunch of people together in a room, you do a brainstorming and you think about solutions. No, in this process here, we spent almost like 70 to 80% of the time of a project thinking about the problem that we're trying to solve. And then we start to exploring the solution space. In all of this definition of what is worthwhile to work on, value proposition design can prove very useful. The value proposition design comes from the business model canvas that was very popular in 2015-16, very famous. And it focuses on these two axes of the business model canvas. It looks into the value propositions and the customer segments, right? So whenever we're talking about these two aspects here expanded, they look like this. Here you see that all of these items that are related in one side of the column are directly correlated with the other side. The right side is about the user needs and what they have at this moment. How do they do the things that they do right now? And the left side is how you're proposing to make the world better for that user. Always when you're thinking about value proposition, creating a business, you're thinking about how to make the world better for a given person, right? And here there are different ways of making that world better. You could alleviate their pains. You could make it easier for them to not suffer from something, or you could increase their potentiality by making the world that's already good even better, right? So that's why we break it down into gains and pains there. What are some of the frustrations that my user has? That would be the pains. And what are some of the motivations that my user has? And that would be the gains that you have. How can you improve the world that's already working well for them? And that's, you know, like whenever you're thinking about products again, is how to improve from a functional standpoint to a more emotional standpoint and giving even more to the users. Whenever you connect this together, you're going to have a list of things. That's what the customer jobs is. It's a list of things that your user is trying to achieve, a list of things that they have to do. And then you have your products and services on the left side that will find those needs, right? So with the customer profile, you clarify your customer understanding. That's the right side of our graphic there. With the value map, you describe how you intend to create value for that customer. and then you achieve feet between them when one connects with the other. Here's an example. These are the three main words in this process here: customer profile, value map, and finding feet. This is an example from a workshop that I ran last year with design students. And we looked at problems in the UN Sustainable Goals and looking at what, narrowing down in this whole process that I'm presenting here for you guys. From the problem statement, they got to this point of creating the value proposition canvas. And you see that here, we're thinking about three different levels of exploration: social, emotional, and financial. It's related to the tangible and lucrative and important items that we saw earlier. And you see that even like they connected, they did a really good job. This group did a really good job connecting the gains with the gain creators and the pains with the pain relievers. And even so, they did it in such a in-depth way that they needed another space to create the solution ideas, because they kept thinking of new ways of solving those issues that they were having. You see that the expansion that we have on the ideation here, it's much more fruitful than a group of people in a room shouting ideas. You know, this is a process that comes from what we're going to see in a little bit, the together alone type of approach for design. All right, that was a long wrap. So now we're going to talk a little bit about design sprint. So we saw how this is powerful, right? Like this mindset, this design thinking approach is very powerful to creating value to your users. Why design sprint changes the game a little bit. Design sprint is a step-by-step 5-day system for solving big problems and testing big ideas. This is the pitch from Jake Knapp from the AJ Smart, the guy that wrote the book Design Sprint. Here is the design thinking methodology process in a setting, right? So this comes from the Lean Startup book. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but you see that you come from data, goes to idea, you build that idea, and you launch, right? This is a process that has been working, right? It has been working, has been proving successful. But the problem is that every now and then, the build part is going to take forever. And then until you have that product to launch, until you have that launching, you cannot work with the data. You cannot understand how the data is connected to your user, right? So what the design sprint suggests is that we can do something, we can do this process moving a lot faster, going from idea to data right away. Here's how it's breaking down. It's a 1-week process, right? So each day of the week, like the people that are tasked to develop this new feature or new idea or new project are tasked to free their schedule just for a week. And then you can gather most of the stakeholders that are involved in that project together, hopefully in the same room. Monday is about mapping, right? It's mapping the problems that are in the world and defaulting to one key challenge. Tuesday is about sketching the ideas. So sketching the competing ideas and solution. And we do that in what's called a alone together mindset. So instead of co-creating it together, people work individually in possible solutions and then present it to gather feedback in the same day. After that, we get to a point where the best solutions are voted and decided together. And there's one person in the beginning of the workshop, of the design sprint workshop, that's going to be considered the decider. That could be the project manager, could be the lead designer. It depends on what you're trying to develop, right? And that person is going to look at all of the voting, all of the group work that you did, but they're going to decide alone what to build. And then comes to Thursday, that's the day where you're going to actually prototype. And here the world of the game is, what do I need to learn? What is the most important thing that I need to learn? And what is the least amount of work that I need to put to learn the thing that I need to learn? I'm going to repeat that because that's a mouthful. with all of the research that you did before, you contemplate what you need to learn, what you're trying to learn with this whole process. With the prototyping, that's the culmination of that, where you're going to have like an artifact for you to learn more about the question that you're asking. You see that this is a very similar process to what happens on the sciences, right? It's a assumption, proving assumption, assumption, developing method of analyzing, proving assumption, or discarding assumption. That's the methodology that we're talking about here. And then when we test it, we actually gather that quick and dirty data from the users. Testing with 5 users will give you enough input in your project to improve 80% of your features. It's a 20-80% Pareto principle, what's called. But only 5, it seems like you need a lot of people. That was my assumption in the beginning too. But with only 5 people, if you have people enough trained to understand how to guide an interview, you can gather a lot of insight into how to improve your project. So here are a couple of the design sprint principles. Again, like I mentioned already, the together alone. If you think about the divergent convergent phase of the double diamond, whenever you're diverging, is together. Whenever you're converging, it's alone, right? So you diverge whenever you're analyzing the whole map of things of how the world is right now, and then you converge into a problem statement. You diverge when you're exploring different ideas, and then you converge when you're thinking about a prototype. It's the same principle, but very in a very rapid space. Tangible is better than discussion. That means that there's no fruitful conversation without having an artifact to share what you're thinking about. That means that whenever you're bringing an idea to the table, you already have some sort of way to communicating that's bigger than the words that you have for it. So you have a series of sketches, maybe you have a storyboard, maybe you have some aspect of that product, of that idea that you can share and learn more together. Getting started is better than being right? So that's, again, comes from this idea of like cutting the time from discussions and start acting right away. Start doing more, and then showing the concepts through what you're doing. And another one is related to what I said, that you shouldn't rely on creativity, right? Creativity is not like being a perfect design. It's not part of this process. This process is very scientific. You come from an assumption, you develop a way to test that assumption, you gather data on how that assumption was tested, and you validate or discard that assumption, right? So it's very methodic. And all of this is based on this principle from Seth Godin, that fail fast and cheap, fail often in a way that doesn't kill you, right? Right, so wrapping it all up, right? So thinking about the bigger picture of these 3 frameworks that I'm presenting here today. Value proposition design is going to help you to make sure that you're solving for the right problem, focusing on who needs it and why. And in that case, you have to be very specific. Map your customer values, because they are business values. You see here that the customer jobs and the products and services in that map, they are the one and the same. So it's a whole new approach to the human-centered design methodology, where the business, the viability and the desirability part of that triad are connected, heavily connected. Design thinking is going to help you to generate ideas, thinking about them alone together again. Prototyping for the most important thing that you need to learn. So focusing on that as a learning process, not as a releasing process. And knowing what to test, and especially who to test with. And then design print is going to help you to remember to work in small batches and to do less more often, right? That's a very important, like, do less more often. If you do, if you're trying to implement a feature, you don't have to wait months in the line. With 1 week, you can get a very quick artifact to test if that is going to work with a larger audience. Where to go from now? So I separated here, and I'm going to share this presentation again in the chat as soon as I finish. I separated a couple of links for you to learn more. okay, about the design thinking process, about interaction design with the IXDA. The VPD, they have the book, the Value Proposition Design book, very illustrative. They have a bunch of illustrations, very, very colorful. And they have the website that's a companion to that book that has a lot of very good information as well. And then I saved an article here that discusses value proposition design a little bit in a little bit more in depth. And then the design sprint tools. I've separated two. I think the two links that are going to be most important for you at this point is to look at the stories that made this work. Design sprint has been used by Procter & Gamble, Google, Airbnb, Sketch, many different big companies, and they have study cases for how that worked for them in this link. And also the design sprint kit. So the design sprint was generated while Jake Knapp was at Google. So Google has a lot of rights and has a lot of frameworks and little tools for you to implement that design sprint in your company or in your project. Another thing that I would like to address, I'm preparing a group, an independent study group for UC Davis students starting on the spring. I'm putting together a proposal, and hopefully I'll have it ready by spring. And what I'm looking for, I already taught something similar for design students in the fall quarter. But what I'm looking to have now is to have a diverse group of interdisciplinary students that can learn together. And what we're going to be basing it off is in the UN Sustainable Goals. Okay, so if you are interested, I'm going to save the link here on the chat for a forms on Google, where I'm going to have your email, and whenever I have more information about this workshop, I'm going to release it. Probably, hopefully, on the spring. Everything is looking like it's going to happen on the spring. Okay, so I started this talk talking a little bit about creativity and asking if you guys considered yourselves creative. In the middle of the talk, I said that you shouldn't care about creativity because, according to David Kelly, creativity is the ability to take on problems that don't have a clear answer. Right, and I think that all of us, everyone that's here on a hackathon already has that. So you're all creative, I'm sure. Okay, thank you. That's all I had for today, and I'm gonna save the links here for you guys. I have on the chat. Type in here. Oops. So here is the Google Forms. That they have available. On the chat. And there. And here's a link to my presentation. And here. Okay, I'm open now for questions. If you guys have, I still have like 5 minutes. If you guys have any questions for me. Let's see. Right, I don't see. Right, okay, so yeah, that's what I had for you guys. If you have any questions, you can email me as well here on the, I'll type in my email in the chat as well. If you have any other questions about, do you guys have questions about the overall process?
I don't have a question. I'm going to think about everything you've talked about, but I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you think that all this process can be also useful, for example, when you are making a research proposal? Like,
Yeah.
okay.
Right. Yeah, I think so. There's even a book that is called Design Thinking My Life or something like that. Design Thinking for Life. Or so it's what we have here is really an agnostic framework that you can use, right? Again, like, I feel like if you would take one thing from this whole talk is this idea that the design thinking process is a scientific process of analyzing assumptions and recording data about assumptions and changing your assumptions based on the data that you collect. And all of these things that I'm introducing to you guys here, these three frameworks that I talked about, are different tools for you to do this simple thing of creating. It helps you to create better assumptions. The VPD helps you create better assumptions. The design thinking process helps you to analyze those assumptions better. And the design thinking process helps to make it faster, right? But it's basically these three things.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Right. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for you guys that participated. If you have any other questions, I'm open. You know, my email is available for you guys, and I'd love to see a more diverse group of people in this workshop by spring. It's going to be hopefully a 6-week, every week meeting, six meeting where we're going to meet every week and discuss this more in depth. I'm going to introduce a lot of these different tools that are available for everyone, and showing how to do that in action. Like by the end of last quarter, three groups have left the workshop with projects that won the Little Bang Awards. So it comes out with a very complete set of going from the theoretical part and experimenting that using the UN Sustainable Goals. Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, thank you for showing up.
Thank you.
And let me know if you want to connect later. Okay. Thank you.